Welcome to Anubhuti, where we delve into pressing issues that shape our society. Today, we are honored to have with us Miss Alma Chopra, a passionate disability rights activist, to shed light on the intricate subjects of disability, stigma, and development in India. From personal experiences to strategic interventions, she'll guide us through the challenges faced by people with disabilities and challenging stigma in fostering an inclusive society. So, my dear listeners, let's hear from her. Hello, Alma. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Purva. Thank you for that warm introduction and for having me here today.
So, I would like for our audience that if you can go on and tell us more about yourself.
Okay, sure. So I was born and brought up in the United States, completed my education, undergrad, postgrad, and I moved here about 10 years ago.
Right.
So the reason my interest in disability activism stemmed from being diagnosed with my own neurological condition when I was just 10 years old. And I think that's where I started. So the difficulties I faced, the challenges I overcame, I think that brought me here today. And at some point I realized मेरे को अब वापस से ना जो मैंने लिया 10-20 साल से, जो मैंने रोया, मैंने सोचा my life is shattered, as most people with disability think. अब मैंने सोचा what I've learned through my disability is time to help others, learn from my things that I've made a mistake on, things that I've learned through my journey. So I help the way I help is I'm a life coach, I'm a motivational speaker, and of course, disability awareness activist.
That's beautiful, Alma. So, Alma, I believe living a life with disability is a very humbling experience. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it definitely is. When you're diagnosed with a life-threatening or life-changing disease, there are certain things that you have to face and overcome that you necessarily wouldn't have to had you not had that challenge. So when I was diagnosed at 10, it kind of pushed me and prompted me to face things, to be more mature about certain things rather than to be focused on being social or being with my friends, and just being part of the group. There are other priorities on my plate that you don't necessarily have to deal with when you're 10 years old.
Right.
Generally, you deal with those when you're 20, 30 years old. So to a certain extent, you're kind of matured earlier in a certain way.
So, like you told us earlier, you moved from US to India. That is in itself a huge change for anyone. But when we talk about accessibility, stigma, and inclusive society, that must be two different nations.
Yes, so very frankly, I was not very happy with the move to India. The stigmas here are very much cultural embedded.
Right.
There are universal stigmas that I can get into when we talk about stigmas, but the stigmas that are prevalent in India are very cultural based, which is very problematic because I have a disability which inferiorizes me from the societal perspective. Then on top of that, I'm a female, and in India, females are inferiorized rather than males. So I'm kind of like a double, triple minority here.
Right.
In India.
I think that's a very poignant statement when you said like women in India and a woman in disability in India is doubly marginalized.
Yes, it is very marginalized. It's very prevalent. You just go to the stores, you just look at the education system, you see the preference, the importance of males over females. And me coming from the US or the West, where independence is more stressed, it's very bothersome to me because I myself am more of a feminist. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, I have a disability. So being a very strong person who's marginalized even more and looked at weirdly in the streets, it bothers me.
It definitely does. So I would like to know more about your journey as the life coach and also as a disability activist in India.
So I think my journey is very simple. My journey is our mission दूसरे को मदद करना, है ना? So I am, one of the degrees I have is in psychology. So whether it's mental, whether it's depression, stress, anger, जो भी है, that kind of restricts us and kind of bottles us in. That's what I try to help people get over, whether you have a disability or not, है ना? जो when you have a disability, you tend to have more of an inferiority complex, especially जब मैंने देखा इंडिया में, क्योंकि फिर your family, friends, media, disability को ज़्यादा यहाँ पे marginalize करते,
Right.
तो जो लोग चल नहीं सकते या देख नहीं सकते, क्या कुछ problem है, they always feel like more ashamed, है ना, versus the West, where I came from.
It's also being said that disability community in itself is quite fragmented because there are multiple kind of disabilities. Invisible disability, visible disability, then we have developmental or progressive disabilities. So how can one cater about it from the perspective solely from the policy side?
I think disabilities are very fragmented and all around the world, है ना? सिर्फ इंडिया में नहीं है. Invisible disabilities यहाँ भी है, फिर बाहर भी है ना? So it's fragmented everywhere, but in terms of policies, जैसे हमारे दुनिया में white है, black है, you know, and there are others, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam. There has to be not one, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 10 policies, but it can't be one for every different person. Everyone has to be mainstreamed. जो मैं देख रही हूँ, हमारे इंडिया में ज़्यादा क्या होता है, segregation होता है. ये women के लिए होता है, ये men के लिए होता है, ये disabled के लिए होता है, ये old people के लिए होता है, ये बच्चे के लिए होता है, ये 18 above के लिए होता है. So our side here, I think, is very segregated, and I think between policymakers and stakeholders, we should try to mainstream everything.
So what are the hurdles that you faced as an activist in this field?
I think the hurdles that I face, predominantly what I want to work on is the awareness.
Right.
Not per se the awareness of your rights, the awareness of society as a whole. Because जहाँ से मैं गुजरी हूँ, the challenges I faced were not in obtaining education, not in accessibility, not in like me being able to do what my friends did. वो तो प्रॉब्लम है जब आप कुछ देख नहीं सकते हो, कि आपका कुछ प्रॉब्लम है, आप कुछ ना कुछ प्रॉब्लम आएगा एजुकेशन में या एक्सेसिबिलिटी. मेरा मकसद है उस पर काम करना है, तो लोगों को like to make societal awareness, to raise societal awareness, so that people will be more compassionate, understanding to our difficulties.
Understood. So moving on to the next very important question. What do you want to tell us about the stigma that is related to disability in our society?
So I think disability in our society, there are universal stigmas, but I can first talk about the stigmas we face here. So very two prominent stigmas are cultural-based, religion-based.
Right.
One that disability is a punishment from God, है ना? So, and usually in Hinduism, people being so religious here, they will ostracize you if they feel that, oh, इसको कुछ काला जादू हो रहा है इसके साथ, है ना? So if you are looked at like you have a curse placed on you, people are going to say, oh, we don't want to deal with that person, है ना? So that's one stigma that is, I think it's becoming more remote as society in general in India is moving more globalized, that is still a problem. The other stigma is that it's similar to the first stigma, but it's the disabilities because you're a bad person and you have bad karma, and इसलिए आपको सजा मिली है.
That touches quite close to the heart.
Yeah, it's sad, but it's true. And I think so. Like India is developed on the caste system. We have untouchables. We have the ladder goes up, and ends with teachers and pundits, right? Just like that. I think that it was mainstream society, our belief in mainstream society. But just like the stigmas that I just spoke to you about disability, the caste system as well as these stigmas, while they are prevalent in India, it's becoming more sidelined, and it's more prevalent now in remote villages, smaller villages, as the main culture and society in India. We are more globalized and looking towards the West for guidance.
So what do you think is a solution? How can we fight these stigmas?
I think the only way to fight stigmas is awareness. So if you look at the stigmas that we have in India, the only way we're overcoming these stigmas, whether it's the caste system or even that a person with a disability is being punished by God, the only way to get over those is to open ourselves up to other cultures and other really civilizations, है ना? So I mean, you have some universal stigmas are people with disabilities are inferior, people with disabilities aren't incapable. Those are universal stigmas, and people like yourself or me, even me, we're combating those stigmas and those stereotypes by overcoming and showing everyone how powerful we are and that we are capable and we're not inferior. But I think the only way to overcome these is for us, people like us with the disabilities, to be vocal, to be loud, to be out there, and then people on the other end to be aware that there are people like us that are as capable, as worthy of having or leading a full life as anyone else.
So how the policy makers can address these issues?
I think the policy makers can address these issues by definitely working with stakeholders, people with disabilities themselves that have gone through the hurdles. Like, for example, if you look at the government in India or even in the US or anywhere else, you'll see that the policymakers are men, usually older men, but that don't really have a first-hand experience with the challenge that we're working on. So if you have a person, a policymaker who's working on this disability policy, the stakeholder should be, the policymaker should be very involved with the stakeholder, right? And then that's not happening, and that's a huge gap, because the only way we're going to mainstream the society is to bring policies that make our schools more inclusive, to make our policies more inclusive, to make our roads, our buildings more accessible, to make it a society that's more seamless rather than segregated.
Understood. How can inclusive education and more inclusive employment opportunity can help us with it?
I think having inclusive education and inclusive employment just brings us to a mainstream society. I don't even think we're there yet, because if you look at our companies in India, if you look at our schools in India, we have far less than half, which is inclusive, right? So first we have to work on making the schools inclusive and the companies inclusive, which is difficult, right? Because we're talking about private institutions, privately funded institutions. So when it starts with our government, you look at schools, you look at hotels, you look at public places, public banks. The accessibility, the inclusion is not there. So if our government is already lacking, how do you expect our private institutions and private stakeholders to follow suit? Right? Unfortunately, it starts from the government. Right? For example, I'll give you an example. I just went to Purple Fest, which was held in Goa. Purple Fest was the first inclusive event that celebrates kind of people with disabilities. But in Goa itself, you have hotels there that don't even follow the Disability Act, where you're supposed to have 4 rooms in the hotel dedicated for handicap accessibility, and they're not following that. So my point is, you have Goa, which is putting on a great fest for inclusivity. Meanwhile, the roads, the hotels are not equipped for accessibility. So if you want to go there, my friends even called me, who are in wheelchairs, how are we going to go there? Where are you staying? We can't find rooms that are accessible. So before you want to put on a fest, which is glamorous, you have to make sure you're equipped to house the people you're making the fest for.
Understood. You very rightly brought this to light, that we are probably not there when we talk about inclusive education and our employment. So let's just talk about the smallest unit of the society, that is a family. So when a child with disability is born in a family who is yet not aware about disability, but is rather surrounded with the stigmas, how can they get around it?
I think it starts definitely with family. So the awareness has to be there. Right now, the way we act with children, when a family has a child with a disability, sometimes it's a source of shame. And this kind of ideology is again dissipating to smaller and remote villages, but it's a similar concept. Like when a family has a girl child and rather than a male child, they kind of they're not as enthusiastic about it. And even though that's an older ideology and an older concept, we can use this as an example. So similarly, it starts with the child, right? The family is the first teacher for the child. The mother, the parents, the siblings, है ना? जो वो करेंगे, जैसे वो करेंगे, वो ही बच्चा सीखेगा. Now, if you're ashamed of me, I'm going to start feeling ashamed of yourself. है ना? अगर मेरा परिवार मेरे को प्यार करेगा, हाँ, आप कर सकते हो, आप काबिल हो, आपको वार्ता ना अच्छी गेम चल सकते हैं. फिर बच्चा भी ऐसे बड़ा होगा ना, मैं कर सकता हूँ.
That's very strong statements. कि माँ बाप या परिवार जैसे आपका भरण पोषण करेंगे वैसे ही आप बड़े होंगे. And that is true for a child with disability or a non-disabled child as well. We have to ensure that they know how to conduct themselves in the society.
Yes.
So are there any other pointers or any personal anecdotes that you want to share with us?
My personal anecdotes, I mean, I think मैं सारा कुछ मैं गुजर चुकी हूँ सारा कुछ के साथ. I was born, I was born normal. I had a healthy childhood, great childhood actually. Then when I was diagnosed, ये सारा guilt, shame, सब कुछ मैंने को hit करा, depression. तो आज जहाँ मैं हूँ, जहाँ स्थिति पे मैं हूँ, I've kind of मैं यहाँ से शुरू करा और मैं यहाँ पहुँच गई. तो now I'm in a position to give back. मैं ये नहीं कह रही हूँ कि मैं डिप्रेशन में जाती नहीं हूँ. मेरे को तकलीफ है. जैसे मेरे काउंटर पार्ट्स हैं जो मैं स्कूल के साथ गई, उनके पास फैमिली से, करियर से, बहुत कुछ ऐसे है जो वो कर सकते हैं जो मैं नहीं कर सकती हूँ. जब before I was diagnosed, I was I was an athlete. I was of many different things I could do as a gymnast, almost at the level of being on the Olympic team in the US. तो I mean, जैसे मैं diagnosed हो गई, अब मैं वो नहीं कर सकती थी. And also that's, for a child especially, that's devastating. You know, despite what your parents go through, to know that you can't do what you love doing anymore, and to know that you're different from everyone else, that's devastating as a child. But because I learned that, now I'm at age and a space where I can turn back and say, ठीक है, अब मैं दूसरे को help कर सकती हूँ, जो मैंने सीखा मेरे journey से.
So would you like to use this platform and aware people about ataxia?
So ataxia is it's very rare disorder. It's predominantly known for being genetic. The most popular form of ataxia is Friedreich's. I unfortunately have spinocerebellar ataxia, which I don't know my etiology, so where it came from, and I don't have a prognosis, so no one knows what's really going to happen to me. Actually, जब मैं diagnosed हुई थी, doctors के पास, सारे doctors के पास चले गए और सबने बोला 18 साल की है, कुछ नहीं कर पाएगी, wheelchair में हो जाएगी. You know, so अगर आपको disability भी है, you know, it's not, don't just listen to what other people say to you. Think about what you want, empower yourself, believe that you can do it.
So I would like to repeat my question here again from the one that we started with. How do you think that developmental disabilities differ from other disabilities that do not peak, like blindness, polio, etc.?
I think having a stable but chronic disability is definitely not easier to deal with, but at least you kind of know what to expect. Whereas when you have a developmental disability, हमेशा ऊपर नीचे जाता है. आपको ठीक तरह पता नहीं होता है अब क्या होगा मेरे साथ, है ना. आपको ठीक है, आपको हाईवे मालूम है, पर पता नहीं ये हाईवे कहाँ ले जाएगा, zigzag कहाँ है ना. जब आपको कोई chronic ailment होता है, आपको लगभग पता है that this is my route, है ना. So you can gauge and you can plan to a certain extent. And I would also like to give an example of UDID card, which is very important for people with different abilities. But the UDID card, there are so many you know, locomotor, there are different categories, है ना. पर किसी को मालूम ही नहीं कैटेगरीज क्या है ना. जब मैं गई अपना UDID कार्ड के लिए, मेरे को डाले क्या लोकोमोटर में, जो जहाँ से शुरू होता है वो गवर्नमेंट से शुरू होता है,
राइट.
And अगर गवर्नमेंट को, if they don't want to spend the time, invest the time to appropriately I would say cater to your population, then I think the rest of the population, if they see the government, they're just going to follow suit. है ना. जो भी आपका है, if you're chronic, if you're developmental, if you're neurological, if you're intellectual, if you're locomotor, there's certain there are certain differences between all of them, but there needs to be an initiative from the government that looks at this population and addresses it appropriately, because we are a significant part of the population. No?
That's very true. I believe the government take cognizance of this and they come up with more inclusive policies where even the categories can accept us and where we can have the right diagnosis on our UDID cards.
Yes, I think that's very important, and that's only just the beginning. अगर कोई policy makers है जो देख रहे हो, please note that these are our lives that you're defining and that you're playing with. we need your support, your guidance, your help to not only correctly categorize us on the UDID card, but help us integrate to mainstream society, starting with education, right?
Right.
I think that's very helpful, because our population is not meant to be marginalized. We're a part of the India population. Our voices matter just as much as anyone else's.
Thank you so much, Alma. Would you like to share with us some wise words before we end today's show?
तो मेरे को ये बोलना है कि so I have a neurological condition that I was diagnosed with more than 20 years ago, but I'm at a point where I'll say today that I don't place the prefix dis in disability. I don't even believe in the term disability, because you can't say I have a disability. People say you have a disability. Why does dis, which usually means inferior, Hannah?
Right.
You have dislike, you have disorganized, it's always less. Why are we disabled? We are fully abled. I think we're just differently abled. Everyone on the planet is able. If you have an issue, physical, mental, emotional, you're just differently abled. ना मैं शायद मैं खुद से जान नहीं सकती, पर मैं गारंटी करती हूँ मेरा दिमाग आपसे ज़्यादा चलता है. And so there are certain talents that I have that you have that shouldn't be marginalized. They're as important.
Great. Thank you so much. And your presence was so beautiful and important for us, and of course for all of our viewers today.
Thank you. The one thing I do want to mention, if you do need help in finding your power, restarting your story without this, I encourage you to follow me on my social media, which is Alma Chopra, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. And you can also find me on my website, which is almachopra.com. And I hope I can help you. Please reach out.
So my dear listeners, this was us today under Anubhuti. So let's continue to amplify the voices who are me, challenge the stereotypes, and work together to create a more inclusive society. Thank you so much, Alma Chopra, for being here today with all of us and helping our audience to get a sneak peek in your life.
Thank you so
We'll
much.
meet again very soon in another more scintillating episode of Anubhuti. Till then, take care. Thank you.